Okay, we are recording now.
You hit him.
Yeah. Oops. Okay. Today I want to, cover a few things I covered last week. And then actually, this morning I completely changed what it was I was going to talk about. So, once again, I'm going to be more or less winging it. Okay, I really need a bigger printer because that's really hard to read. I guess the first thing I want to cover is, I'm a little, I don't know what word I want to use, distressed in, I feel like there are a lot of times when I'm talking to you guys, I feel like I'm either apologizing because I don't have particular details, or that I'm, let's say, glossing over things. But here's the catch, is if you guys can see in my chart here, which this is an older one, it's actually, I would say, considerably bigger than this one. There is a lot of information that I want to share with you guys. So the trick is, for those of you who don't have better eyes than me, every one of those lines on there, I could probably talk for an entire class, which would mean roughly 112 classes, and we only have 8.
Not even.
Yeah. So we only have 8 classes. So I got to get 112 classes worth of material and only 8. And then plus there's been a few I haven't been here. So what I found, what I'm trying to do, and I guess in some ways I feel like I should have tried to convey some of this when I first started, is that there is so much here as far as apologetics goes. There's no way I can cover it all. So part of what I'm really trying to do is give you guys an overview of what of what you may hear, things that you may have already heard that contradict the Bible, things that you are probably going to hear that contradict the Bible, things that are blatantly against the Bible, things that where it tries to claim from it's the Bible and it's not from the Bible. If you see the one overarching theme there is the Bible. So I'm trying to do is give you guys an overview, kind of like when we first talked about the ark. The ark is not cute, as I like to beat into all your heads. The other thing that I always said with that is I want you guys to stop and think. And this is part of what I'm trying to do. I cannot exhaustively cover everything that I'm going to be talking about here. There are definitely some areas where I feel like I have glossed over. In fact, when we were talking, remember David and his Skittles, I switched over into genetic, if you want to say genetic history, genetic ancestry, and I way glossed over that. We just don't have time. So I guess one thing, if anything I say seems wrong or hard to believe or vague, come and talk to me, because the reason it probably got vague was just in the interest of time, trying to keep things going and trying to cover as much material as possible. So again, aside from the ark is not cute being the main takeaway, the takeaway I really want you guys to get is to stop and think. Because you are going to hear things both inside and outside the church that are going to be a little bit wrong. Preferably, hopefully in our church, not, but actually I'm going to cover that slightly a little bit here. There are times where people say things that are not necessarily biblical just because they've either heard it, they've heard it enough that they've never heard anything contrary. Some of it, especially you get into different creation models, people try to take what they see in the world and match it to what the Bible says, and it may or may not necessarily be true. Examples of that, two that I can think off the top of my head, I'm going to say 20, maybe 30 years ago, there was a big thing that was called the canopy theory. Basically what it was saying was that when God created the earth, on day 2, when he created the firmament and separated the waters from each other, a lot of places talk about that God actually created what was called the water canopy or the ice canopy, that the water that was separated was pushed above the atmosphere. So you had earth, atmosphere, see if I can spell it right on the fly, yay, and then you had what was called the canopy. And it seemed to make sense. People theorized that with the canopy that would cut out ultraviolet radiation, which would then help with the length of life, how long the lifespans were. It was also theorized that it would affect the color of the sky, which would make which would help make animals especially more calm and sedated, and it also seemed to help with the flood, because then a lot of people were able to say, okay, we don't know. This is where some of the water came from. This canopy that was around the earth. The thing is, as they study that model more and more, they realized there's just no way that could work. I wasn't even planning on bringing that up, so I cannot give you any more details for that. Oh, I found markers, but I did not find an eraser. You might have an article of clothing you'd like to donate.
Paper towel?
I have soda
Yes.
right there.
No, that's okay. Get paper towel, please. Actually, if you get them out of the boys' restroom, there's like that much extra paper towel hanging out of the machine, so you don't have to put it to good use. If you feel comfortable doing that. So you're gonna hear things. You'll also hear things where people say like, it never rained before the flood. Nowhere in the Bible does it specifically say it never rained before the flood. It does say it never rained before day 6 or up till after day 6. Again, these aren't major, but they're things that people will try to come up with for ways to try to make things fit with the Bible. As we learn more, we're going to find that some of the ideas that we had saying this is how it must have been don't really fit with the Bible and with reality. So part of this, I want you to stop and think part is when you do hear things, go back to the Bible, study the Bible, see what the Bible actually says. Because there are people, in fact, I don't know if any of you have been to the Akron Fossil Museum. I have the utmost respect for them as an organization trying to teach against evolution. Pardon?
I had my birthday there, so
Yeah.
those two were there.
Yeah. So I think Akron Fossil Museum is a great organization, but the Akron Fossil Museum does still teach the canopy theory, which is very much out of date. So, and I finally remembered one of the big things against the canopy theory would be that on the 4th day God created the sun, moon, and stars. If we would have had this much water, or what would have had to have been ice that far out, we would have never seen past the atmosphere. So we would have never seen the stars or the moon, and the sun would have just been this big old glowing blob that would have been probably, I don't know, 10, hundreds times bigger in our sky, just the way it would have refracted through the canopy. But it was a good try. People are trying to figure out how to make things work, but they don't always end up being current or true, but it just means our interpretation of what the Bible says, we're still trying to figure that out. So, again, the most important thing you guys can take away whenever you hear anybody talk about anything with the world, anything with space, anything with the earth, anything with people, anything with animals, everything, in fact, that's what I wanted to do. For those of you who were here last week, you remember okay, yes, that was not a right on my thought marker. Okay, I guess that stays there for right now. So if you remember, I was using the example that the world wants to say that science is the all-important, most all-encompassing thing, and if we want to bother with the Bible, it takes way place secondary, and it is way separated from science. That we can talk about the Bible and stuff here in church, or we can talk about the real things of science, and they both can't mix. Obviously, I and a lot of people greatly disagree with that. The other worldview that can be a problem that people can fall into is they still want to say that science is the biggest truth, but then they'll fit the Bible under that. Where you end up getting a lot of that is, 1 second. Okay, it's a bad time for a screensaver password. And I tried to print my stuff this morning and my printer was out of toner, so take that as a lesson not to wait till the last minute to print things. So what happens, another way things get messed up is that you have people trying to say, well, science, everything that man has learned about science needs to supersede what the Bible says. What you end up with there, we'll say, let's see if I can cover these. How can I sum these up? There is, if you do that, if you put science above the Bible, you end up with a few different things. And yes, I'm not spelling all today. Where's my paper? You end up with sometimes what's referred to as theistic evolution. You end up with what are the others? Intelligent design. You end up with let's see, gap theory. And they kind of all can fall under what's often referred to as progressive creation. What's happening, the problem with these is these often are by what I would even consider well-meaning Christians who are then saying, well, the scientists obviously know what they're talking about, so whatever the scientists say, we're going to figure out ways to make the Bible come under science and make it so, yes? Yeah, I know, I'm getting up, so I think I got what I needed. If not, you guys will be able to watch enough to learn my password, and I'm going to have to change my password tomorrow. They try to fit the Bible under science because they, for whatever reason, I would argue, I'll put number one, putting way too much faith in science, way too little faith in the Bible, and have I'm not quite even sure how to describe it, a bizarre effort to try to keep both the secular world under the guise of origin sciences and the Bible, trying to make them fit. And origin science is evolution, and that's talked about, absolutely will not fit the Bible. Just real quick, there's a lot of crossover in all of these, but basically what these try to do is say that, well, what scientists sees as proof of evolution are tools that God actually used to create the world. A favorite one, which I would say would fall probably under progressive creation, gap theory, theistic evolution, is what's referred to as the day-age theory. Basically, where we as Christians say, okay, God created the creation took place in 6 distinct days. Let's see if I can do this right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yay! I think I spaced it out okay. And that is a 6, not a fish hanging upside down. That where we're saying that the creation happened in 6 distinct 24-hour days. What they try to do by fitting evolution in here is say, well, God doesn't actually say it was days. This could be 1 million years, 2 million years, 3 million years, 4 million years, and so on. That's how they try to fit evolution into the biblical creation. There's so many things wrong with that I could spend many days on that. I'll just real quick touch on it. And the fact that the problem if you do stuff like this is, and this is the most important part, why creation, biblical creation is so important, is that when God was done on day upside down fish, or 6, that the world at that point was perfect. Oh, that's really hard to write from the same one. That the world was perfect. Every day after God created, it says in the evening and night were day 2 or day 3, and that it was good. God finishes creating earth, creating man, creating animals, creating dinosaurs. Happy camper. God says that it was good, because at that point, this is exactly how God had decided to create the world. There is no death, there is no sin, everything is working together as the way God designed it. Some point after that is when Adam and Eve sin and then cause what we often just refer to as the fall. And that is now the state that the world is in today. There is death, there is sin, there is suffering. There is, never mind. Don't get silly. But what happens is when you try to turn these into millions of years, then that means, aside from many other things, that means there had to be death for these millions and billions of years. That if you say, well, God created, and that's the thing, even when you get into some of these, you end up rearranging the days, but I won't go into that right now. But that once you say this day took 1,000,000 years, you can't say every plant lived for 1,000,000 years. You can't say every animal lived for 1,000,000 years. Especially since what happens is then they try to say, well, here in this day 4 was land animals, right? Boy, I hope I get all these right. It's going to be really embarrassing. Then
Day 4 wasn't like animals.
Sun, moon, and stars.
That's what I just said, didn't I? Yes, I did get that right. Okay, let's slide them over to 5 and see if anybody argues.
6.
6? Okay, thank you.
6 landed.
Oh yeah, that's right. Fifth was bird and fish.
Fish, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad someone's paying attention. And I guess in light of my earlier discussion, I am trying to cover a lot here, so obviously I can't remember. I have not planned a specific step-by-step of what to say. Some of this I'm just trying to cover a lot of things, so obviously I do know what the right answer is. It's just when I'm trying to do it on the fly, I forget sometimes. But what they then also try to do, and this is where you get into either progressive creation or theistic evolution, is trying to say, well, God created, on day 5, God created the first fish. Ooh, there's a fish there. And then through a theistic evolutionary process, in those millions of years, is when all the different types of fish came. Which then definitely gets into this fish had to die, so this fish, and you're getting into a lot of sin and death. Which then, where you really get into problems, especially with like progressive creationism. In fact, one who very frustrates me, there's a guy named Hugh Ross who has a so-called ministry called Reasons to Believe. He is a big proponent of progressive creationism, which is basically he's saying that really this was 6 million, bajillion, whatever years, that all this death, suffering, creation, and everything happened up to, we'll say, somewhere right here, and then God was like, oh, now I get it, now I know how to make things, now I'm going to make Adam and Eve. Oh, and I'm not writing that sideways. But that, oh, now I know how to do it. Okay, come into the side. That is saying, oh, okay, after this 6 bajillion years, at the very end of creation, I have now figured out how to make people. All this extra practice, I'm good now. Bam, I'm making Adam and Eve. And then, again, trying to say biblically, well, it's perfect. Well, what you've now got, according to this worldview, is 6 bajillion years worth of death and fossils and decay and destruction and cancer and other horrible things. Apparently, God brings out the gigantic cosmic concrete paver, paves over all that, puts Adam and Eve on the earth, and then says, yep, that's good. It's a very rotten Eve. My apologies to the females in the room. But then he has now paved over all this, and you just have all of this death, and this is a very, very poor representation of the skull. Almost.
Yeah, it's realistic.
That'll work? No. Okay. But he has now covered over all this. All this death doesn't matter. Apparently God's vision is very weak. God can only see down to this layer of concrete and doesn't see all this death under it, and says, yes, this is good. Obviously, I think we can all be smart enough to know that millions of years of death would not qualify as good, or even remotely remotely good.
And God doesn't need glasses.
And God does not need glasses, yes. You would
Okay, so Hugh Ross, progressive creation,
Mhm.
he's saying it's millions of years of these 6 days or
Eons,
like
yeah.
millions of years for each day. And then he's got, okay, now God gets it right, Adam and Eve are there. Does he then say the 6 days of creation? He doesn't even put after that, does he? It's all before, and then we have Adam and Eve.
Yes,
He doesn't even try to.
yes. And where it gets really messy, he then also subscribes to the, to whatever scientists want to call them, proto-humans, pre-humans, that he says that there were, in this period, the non-human bipedal humanoids. So that's where you get with science with like Lucy and Neanderthals and all that kind of stuff where evolution tries to say, where scientists try to say this is the steps of what it was before people became humans. The progressive creation and Hugh Ross and stuff all say, okay, well, there were humanish type things, but they had no souls. So they died and grew until man, God got it right, and then he decided to then now create the human soul. So up till then, any of these things, in their opinion, looked vaguely human, had no soul, they were just animals, they were practice, which really gets into a problem because what happens, first of all, and so many different directions I can go here, which is why we could be here for years and I could not cover all of this. Evolutionists try to take all the different types of animals and all the different types of humans and try to fit them into one nice line. Just like there are tall humans and short humans and round humans and white humans and black humans, there are other different characteristics. So what evolutionists want to call the Neanderthal is just a normal human being that had a bigger eyebrow or bigger, more pronounced forehead bone. Which ironically, they actually had bigger brain cases than, or bigger capacity for bigger brains than we, is what we consider ourselves the ultimate human beings up to this point had back then. All that was just like the pygmies that are, I assume, still alive in Africa or wherever today. They're smaller, they're still human. There is genetic diversity, that a lot of that genetic diversity has gone out over the course of generations for humanity, but just because they look slightly different does not mean that they weren't fully human. It'd be like if
Germans in America.
yeah, it would be like someone then tried to go to a modern day graveyard or a modern day whatever and said, well, gosh, and that's really what evolution did. They said, well, black people look so much different than white people. They must have come from some other ancestor that they were in or behind an evolution. And once they evolved enough, they wouldn't have them. They wouldn't be as black. They'd be more white. And you get all this crazy stuff trying to make sense of it. If you're trying to make sense of it either without God, like evolution does, or even worse, trying to make what God said is fit into the evolution model when you get into these creation compromises. Yes, in the back.
I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of Hugh Ross? Raise your hand if you've heard that name before. Have any of you heard of Hugh Ross?
Have any of you seen God's Not Dead?
The movie.
Then you have heard of Hugh Ross. God's Not Dead was I would say, an
I've
excellent.
heard the song. I've heard
Okay, yes.
the movie.
Yes.
I've heard the
God's Not Dead is an excellent movie. In fact, our church was talking, my understanding is going to show it. But in that movie, the college student who is trying to argue for the existence of God is using arguments based on progressive creation. They're subtle enough to the point that when I first saw the movie, I was like, something didn't seem right, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around it because it was fairly quick, it was fairly bundled in with a bunch of other stuff, but once you sit and think about it, unfortunately what the guy is using to try to prove the existence of God is trying to use progressive creation, is trying to use millions of years, is trying to use theistic evolution, and it's sad. So I'm hoping, and in fact that's part of why I'm so unprepared this morning. I was sending a lengthy, well not too lengthy, semi-lengthy email to miscellaneous leaders in our church conveying some of my concerns in hopes of getting some discussion started, preferably before the movie starts.
And I guess, can I say a little bit more?
Yes.
I just, I want you guys to realize that Hugh Ross claims to be a Christian.
He claims to be a Christian, and I would even and this is where it gets tricky, and wow, this is a whole other ball of wax. If anybody espouses theistic evolution, gap theory, or progressive creation, we are in no place to say these people are not Christians. They could very well. I have no reason to doubt that Hugh Ross is a Christian and believes in salvation through Christ. The problem becomes if they understand and accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of their life, but they are teaching this, they are laying the foundations for other people not to believe in God. And in fact, we saw that speaker at Answers in Genesis at a Creation Museum. What happened, you had these colleges that started out, pardon?
I remember
Yes.
that.
Started out biblically. The college started out biblically, but they said, well, then we're going to have millions of years. So then the next guy was like, well, if we have millions of years, we can have theistic evolution. Well, if you have theistic evolution, do we really need God? And if we really need God, do we really need God? And so on. And then now it was ridiculously short. A couple of generations or a couple of changes in leadership, and churches or colleges like Yale and Harvard that were originally founded to be theological seminaries are now some of the most godless organizations in the world, and teaching people there is no such thing as God. Because what happened is people like Hugh Ross, progressive creationists, they say, yes, I believe in God, but I don't believe this part about the Bible. Well, that's another thing I wanted to do. Then if you then say, well, I believe this part about the Bible about Jesus, but I don't believe this part about creation and the flood, then the person who listens to you is like, well, that's ridiculous. Why? If you're saying, here's the whole Bible, but don't believe this first part and then this next part, but you can, when you get down to here, start believing this.
It's picking and choosing.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's intellectual suicide. You can't argue that. You either have to believe that the Bible is the literal, is the Word of God in its original translations, or that it isn't. And the problem is people try to pick and choose and say, yeah, you need to believe the New Testament, all this awkward, weird stuff here at the beginning, we don't need that. Just ignore that. But we can't, because the Old Testament creation, God created things 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, everything was good. The fall is why then we needed Jesus and salvation. If there was no fall, if there was death and evolution for millions of years, Jesus becomes a joke. Jesus becomes some bizarre, twisted, comedic joke on God's behalf, and I can assure you that is not the case. So, for Jesus to come and save humans from the fall, that means things had to be perfect, which means that God had to have created things in 6 days, and which means we have to believe the entire Bible. And if we're not, we may believe in Jesus, we may believe in salvation, but no one's going to believe us. Our children are not going to believe us. People we witness to are not going to believe us. And people who stop and sit and analyze what it is we're saying are going to say there's something horribly inconsistent and wrong there. And then all they're going to do is just throw it all out, because we were willing, not we, but progressive creationists were willing to throw out the first, what do you want to say, 11 chapters? Well, Tower of Babel, because a lot of time, if you deal with progressive creationism or any of these compromises, you end up having to throw out the 6-day literal creation. Many of them have to throw out the flood. Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe says there was no global flood. And then you also have to throw out Tower of Babel, because if you remember when I was talking about Tower of Babel, that's what created the people groups and the languages that we know that have defined the world today. So you're throwing out the 3 primary tenets of how the world came to be as we know it, and then trying to pick up after that and try to make it all fit.
I guess I'm just trying to get across to them that they need to be very aware that there can be so-called Christians out in the world that can lead you astray and are not believing in biblical truth. And so you need to be aware that not only people that aren't Christians obviously can lead you astray, and you need to be careful, but you need to know what you know and be solid in your faith, because there are people and even churches out there, supposedly Christian, that will lead you astray. And what Mr. Forsyth is talking about, you know, you go back to Genesis, and that God created in 6 days, and it was all very good. And if you believe in that progressive creation, or listen to somebody that's saying, well, these aren't literal days, this was really millions of years took place, and like Mr. Forsyth is saying, you would have to have death in those millions of years. Things would die. That's not according to what it says in the Bible. You go back to the 6 days, everything was very good. Then Adam and Eve sinned. That's when everything started to go bad in God's perfect world, and sin came in and death. So that's when it started. So it's like you said, you've got to believe the whole Bible.
And then this is where things get interesting, because using again the example of God's not dead, they're trying to, starting, I can't remember, a couple hundred years ago, people tried to say, well, we can fit the Big Bang Theory into how and the Big Bang Theory was, when God said, let there be light, that was really actually the Big Bang. The problem is, if you go into something like that, what they're then actually doing is saying, well, when according to Big Bang, according to evolutionistic worldview and Big Bang, that you basically are now making creation of the sun and stars day one, then you're making the creation of the earth day two, then you're rearranging all of these items, and God stated, He created the first day of creation. There was the earth covered in water, and it was there, and then day 4, God created the universe around it, which is absolutely completely opposite of how Big Bang and theistic evolution wants to talk. And then what a lot of them will then try to do is then say, okay, well, the universe and the earth were created millions of years ago, but then all this other stuff kind of happened. So then they want to kind of make the day of the order instead into 4-1. Then they say, well, the dinosaurs came before the birds. So, well, that's a rotten one. So you got 4-1. Then you've got 6. Oh, but no, then you've got the fish first. So then you've got like 4.1, then 6, then 4 and 0.2. Then we can get into, oops, we got to fit the animal. And they just start really monkeying around, trying to monkey around with the order of things. Another thing that Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe try to do is because they say this is millions of years, there really was no distinct day. So really, creation day 1 was from here to here. Creation day 2 overlapped 1 and went into 3. And then so it really was more periods, which is untenable for many reasons. The simplest thing is in the Bible it says the day, whatever day God created, and the morning and evening were the first day, second day, third day. It's a little hard to try to define morning and evening when you're then trying to say, well, it was millions of years. The morning was the first million years, and evening was the second million years or something. We just run into real problems there. In fact, it's time to wrap up, so I'm just going to touch on some of these. Gap theory is very similar to progressive creation. Basically, gap theory, because in the Bible it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. Then starting Genesis 1:2, actually 1:2, Genesis 2. I should have checked more of this. Again, this is where I feel like I'm not being convincing in the information I'm giving because I've got too much information swirling around in my head. But basically, in Genesis, there's 2 accounts of creation. There's an overview of what all happened, and then there goes into more detail, especially with talking about Adam and Eve and the fall. Well, what people then like to say is, well, the Bible actually has 2 creations. So there was creation 1, which then they use to fit in the evolution, the millions of years. And that is a nice spelling of evolution. I'm not even going to, well, yeah, whatever. Then there was this gap, and then the second account of creation is what we know. So again, basically, God created the world, evolution happened over millions of years. God realized, gosh, I really don't know what I'm doing. Let's just pave over this world, start fresh, and now that's the second account in Genesis. That's called the gap theory. again, you have that problem because now you've got millions of years of death under there before God rebooted and tried again, because apparently God's not smart enough to figure out how to do it right the first time. Intelligent design is handy for being able to talk about the design of creation, especially in the secular world. But the problem is, when you talk intelligent design, basically people are saying, this is obviously designed by somebody, but we don't know who. So that can leave it to be God, Captain Crunch, aliens, whatever, however they want to decide who that intelligent designer was. The problem is, again, you're throwing out part of the Bible. The whole point and happening of creation and the fall comes back to salvation in Jesus. That if you then say, well, it was intelligently designed by somebody, but we don't know who, you have now then just thrown out the reason for Jesus and his salvation, because you've just now thrown out the concept of sin and the fallen earth. Theistic evolution kind of crosses across into a lot of these. Basically, it's saying that God booted the world here, say on day one, and theistic evolution is, I would say, very similar to progressive creation or day-age theory, that basically God started the world, but only with little microscopic organisms, and then, as scientists have determined through the fossil record, that they have all branched out, and that evolution really actually took place up to the culmination of humans however many tens of thousands of years ago. Again, you've got the whole problem, eons worth of death before you can get to the point of where they didn't want to say. Basically, all compromises are basically trying to say that, here, biblically speaking, the world started here. What happens then, actually here, let's make it easier. We'll say the biblically speaking, the world started here. Oh wow, I'm doing good. And then, as the Bible and history unfolds, this is the part that's covered in the history that we know it. In an effort to try to sublimate the Bible under science, then what they say is, well, even though God was the one that was here, God was the one that was creation, God was the one who explained how everything works, we know that scientists know more than God does. So what we're just going to do is we're going to take from the beginning that the Bible talks about, and we're going to claim that science has found all the answers of what really happened before God got around to deciding to reveal his story and everything to us. And they're just cramming all this extra unbiblical junk in here, trying to say that it fits in the creation model before the Bible, before Genesis or warping Genesis. And those are real things you've got to be real careful of, because again, like I pointed out here, you start talking compromise, you start saying, well, you don't need to believe all the Bible, then you end up ultimately having to throw out the Bible. And that's what's happened in so many churches, so many colleges. You would not believe the number of colleges that started out as seminaries that now are the most anti-God establishments in the world. Like I said, Harvard. Oh yeah, Harvard and Yale being the two most prestigious colleges in America, first started out as seminaries. And you're not going to find any Bible study on those colleges in this day and age. And this is something that we've really got to be careful of, because it's easy for us to think, oh, anybody who's going to say stuff wrong about the Bible is going to be outside of the church. And when I say the church, I mean everybody who claims to be Christians. I am not specifically saying our church. I believe our church is pretty solid in teaching the Bible. I've been very pleased with this church and how they base it, how everything is founded and based on the Bible. But there are going to be other Christians who say, well, you can't. And the sad part is, and this is where we as Christians have really screwed up, is that in the last, it was about 200 years ago when the whole evolution and everything started showing up in the world. And at that point, Christians were given the decision of, Christians were given the choice of, well, scientists say that the world has to be millions of years because scientists think the world has to be millions of years, because scientists want the world to be millions of years, because scientists don't want to have to believe what the Bible said. So then at that point, Christianity as we know it had to make the decision. Are we going to take the stand and say, no, the Bible's true, you scientists are fallible human beings who are just kind of leaning it and have an ulterior motive in the fact that you don't want God to be the ultimate answer, or are we going to try to figure out ways to compromise? What happened, a lot of churches, a lot of Christian colleges, they all just went silent. They were like, okay, they bought into the science is over here, Bible's over here. We'll let the scientists in the secular world say anything they want about the world. We're never going to talk about fossils or creation or dinosaurs or anything in church. We're only going to talk about Jesus and the Ten Commandments and all that, and we're going to leave all of this out. So for the last 200 years, the Christian church has basically let the secular worldview run rampant to the point that it's amazing what all things that we don't stop and think about are evolutionistic, and that's something I wanted to get into today that I'm not going to be able to get into until next time. But there is just such underlying foundation of evolutionistic worldview that even as you as a biblical Christian believing in the 6 literal days of creation, you'll be surprised at the things that you don't realize actually do stem from an evolutionistic worldview. And now, I'm going to say in the last 50 years, there has now been serious study and realizing, scientists don't know more than the Bible. We need to look at the Bible. We need to look at the world through the Bible's lenses. That's where probably I would say Henry Morris with the book, The Genesis Flood, I think was his, really looking at the layers of the earth are not laid down millions of years. The layers of the earth were laid down in the flood. That's where a lot of these organizations, including my favorite Answers in Genesis, really have sprung up in the last 50 years, saying this is silly. Us Christians should not have turned our back on the world and on science. Science was founded by Christians. We then let it go and thought we could just do Christianity in the privacy of our own church and it not affect anything in the world. And it has every effect of the world. It has every effect of how you look at every single thing in the world and in the universe. And I see parents out the door, so that's it for this time.
I think you should change intelligent to dumb.
Yes, that would be very true. You were awake. Yay!